Q&A. It's a perfect day because it's slightly overcast, which actually feels a little bit refreshing because it's been so warm the last couple days, which is nice because I feel like all spring has been so cold and wet. But yesterday or 2 days ago, I got a little bit of a sunburn on my arm. And so I was wearing long sleeves. I'm like, okay, we're back into, protecting ourselves from the sun. So that's something that's really important. But I want to do this video because I get asked often some of the same questions. And so I thought it would be great to just make a video and address all of those. And so if you have any questions, go ahead and just drop them in and I'll see them and answer them on the spot or as soon as I'm done answering the other question. But yeah, so I'll get started. The first thing that I get asked often is, where do I get my seeds? And the answer is generally two places. I usually get them from Johnny's Select Seed. They're a seed house. They're open to the public, but I think that they generally grow. I think their clientele is usually like farmers and stuff. And I like Johnny's in particular because I find that the seed descriptions are really easy to understand as far as like if you're looking at carrot seeds, for instance, Johnny's will say that, this carrot performs better than this carrot, but tastes better than this carrot, but worse than that carrot. Or it gives a little bit more information, and then also like growing information, stuff like that. And they do extensive trials and germination testing, and probably the other seed houses do as well, but that's where I get the majority of my seeds from is Johnny's Select Seed. I also order seeds from Territorial, which is down in Oregon. I like them because they're local. And so the seeds are better adapted for our environment. And so that's a benefit. Though the valley is a little bit warmer than I am here in Stanwood. But between Johnny Select Seeds and Territorial is where I get the majority of my seeds. If I'm in a bind, I might grab them real quick off of Amazon or at a local like farm store or whatever and just grab something. But if I'm actually ordering, that's generally where I get my seeds from. I've been meaning to check out a few other seed houses, but that's just historically where I've always ordered my seeds from. Another question I get a lot is, why did you start farming / gardening? And well, that's definitely an easy one. I like to think of myself as like a food activist. And I'd say when I was about like mid-20s, I liked having a small little garden. I lived in like a townhouse and I had some flowers that I purchased from a nursery. And I didn't know anything about zones or like taking care of plants or anything like that. Hi, Beth. And so it kind of grew from there. And then I moved up here to Washington, and I was living in Everett and I had a house. And so I put in some raised beds and I was growing vegetables, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And I always dreamed of having a farm. And it's funny, my whole farming career is built on one day I was dreaming about having a farm, and I was thinking about what kind of animals I'd like to have on my farm. And so I wanted to have sheep. And so I Googled, different sheep breeds, and there was a big list of them. And one of the sheep were called Shetland sheep. So Shetland is a street that I actually grew up on. So I just clicked on them on that breed because it was the most familiar of all the different types of sheep. And I was reading about them, and they kept talking about how they reproduce naturally and unassisted, and kind of like it was a selling point. And for me, that was really interesting because I realized that if they were selling that the sheep could reproduce naturally, then that means that a lot of other sheep don't necessarily share those characteristics. And so I started kind of diving a little deeper into the food sources in general and the animals and stuff like that. And I learned that there's a lot of interesting things about our food supply. and that I kind of didn't want to be a part of that. So my dream of farming and having large gardens grew even more, and wanting to have my own animals and animals that could actually reproduce naturally without artificial insemination or assistance or anything like that. And so through that started my journey of becoming a farmer slash gardener, and learning along the way. But I really didn't know anything when I started. Um, Another question I get asked often is, how did you get your farm name? That's a really good question. So, as you know, the farm name is Little Roots Ranch. And originally, though, I had my sweet baby boy Oliver. He was a Rottweiler, and he passed away when he was only about 3 years old. It was a really unfortunate event. There was a mistake with the diagnosing of him, and they took down his immune system, and he went septic, and so he passed away. But his name is Oliver, and so I wanted to name my farm after him. And so I went to Facebook, and because I was like, well, what about Oliver's farm? Like, I liked kind of the way that sounded, and I wanted to like name the farm in his memory. And I Googled Oliver's farm, and there was like so many different pages of different names, and I was like, oh, Oliver's kind of a common name. And so I was trying to think. Our other dog was Frankie. Frankie had just passed away this last fall. She was still fine then. She was, I think, 16 years old. And so I was trying to think of like Oliver and Frankie, Frankie and Oliver. I tried so many different types, and all of the names were taken. And so I was thinking, like, what am I going to name my farm? And I was doing, of course, soil blocks, and I was looking at one of the little blocks. I had started no, was it pumpkins? I think it was pumpkins, way too early, like obscenely early. Like, it was like February. It was a long time ago, obviously. And I just wanted to see if they would grow, and they had the little roots sticking out of I actually have a picture. Of course, I can't share it, but uh, and it was my first time using soil blocks, and I thought that was so cool. And I was thinking about, I was really starting to get into like soil biology, and realizing, they say you feed the soil, not the plant. And I realized like how important like caring for the soil and the roots of the plant are. And so then I went with Little Roots Ranch. Well, originally I was going to do Little Roots Farm, but I didn't think that flowed really well. And traditionally with a ranch, you have, you think of ranches, ranchers, they run, like hundreds of head of cattle and stuff. And obviously, I don't have any cattle. I didn't then, I don't now. I'd like to, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I don't have the room here. But I like the way Little Roots Ranch flowed. And I did plan to have other animals, and I thought that it just sounded too cute. So I went with ranch, even though I'm technically or definitely not a ranch, but I just thought it sounded cute. And then one day, I guess, if I ever buy a big piece of land and have cattle, then I will be a ranch. Let's see here. I also here's a good question I get. Why is your family never on videos? So that's a great question. Well, that has two different answers. The first one is I do have two teenage daughters, and I think that it's important. Obviously everyone can do what they wish in their life, but for me, I want them to be in control of thank you. I want them to be in control of their social media presence and online presence when they're an adult. And so for me, it's important for me not to have them in any of my videos or anything like that. They do exist. You just won't ever see them. I don't even on my other social medias like Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. Even my personal Facebook, I don't have any pictures of them. And that's just something that I felt was important. And then for Joy, my wife, she doesn't really like to be on camera. And so I of course, don't make her be on camera. She kind of likes it, but I think that most people don't like the way that they sound on camera or the way that they look on camera or whatever. And or like, you know, different things. Like sometimes I'll watch my videos and I'm like, oh, I should have been sitting up straight, or I should have whatever. But I generally, for me, I like being, you know, I like sharing. I think it's just the coolest thing ever, you know. But not everyone shares that, and that's okay. So that's why you generally only see me and not my family. Another question, let's see. Do you wear makeup? No, actually. I mean, sometimes I might, like a couple times a year. I have a channel, I don't have any family either. It's my journey. Yes, exactly. Beth was saying that she has a channel and she doesn't have her family on it either. And yeah, no, I completely understand. But no, I don't wear makeup. I have like some rosacea, and I mean, I do occasionally a couple times a year or whatever. But this is just, I like to present who I am, and this is me. And so I don't use any filters or makeup or anything like that. Um, do you use chemicals? This question I get quite often. And I always am hesitant to answer this because I feel like there's two answers. Because the automatic answer is no, I don't use any chemicals. But then I'll always have somebody, which is true, somebody will say, well, water's a chemical, and which it is, and I definitely use water on my garden. But I think when people ask, are you using chemicals, it's more of like the agrochemicals, you know, like herbicides, pesticides, anything aside, rodent side, insecticide, I don't know, all of those, you know, and so to answer that question, no, I don't use any of those. I always daydream, not in a literal way. You know, when I'm opening new area, I'm like, oh, I know some people will just be able to spray this and not have to worry about it. But no, that's not the decision that I've made for my land. I've always I always stay middle of the road when it comes to other people and what they want to do in their garden, their land, their farm, whatever. And I don't claim to have all the answers. And ultimately, I don't think any of us like really know, you know, about like the long-term effects of different things, you know. I mean, even stuff like, you know, microwave waves or whatever. And so, zero judgment on how somebody manages their garden. For me, I don't use anything. I try and use like natural implements in my garden, and I'm kind of on my journey to being self-sufficient as far as like with using the chicken. In the chicken coop, I have wood flakes and of course their manure, and I use that for a lot of the feeding. I compost that out and let it sit. And then I also, as you know, make the nettle tea for like nutrients and stuff like that. And I'm really into like protecting the worms and growing my soil and rotating and like mixing things like deep rooted crops and shallow rooted crops and attracting beneficial pests. And so I think it's called like biological or ecological farming or gardening, whatever. But that's kind of the approach I take. It admittedly works slower, but that's the road that I've taken. So to answer the question, no, I don't use any chemicals or, well, agrochemicals. Let's see. How did you learn to farm or garden? Well, that's an interesting one. I actually, and there's another question that's, did you grow up on a farm? No, I did not grow up on a farm. I pretty much learned through like books and YouTube, and honestly a lot of trial and error, because you know it's hard to navigate. And so I did all of the things like planting tomatoes in July when it was nice and warm, and I was like, oh, this is a perfect time to plant tomatoes. I learned that's too late. You know, planting peas in the middle of the summer, too late, you know. And so a lot of trial and error, which is why I always tell you guys, if you're experimenting or you do something wrong or whatever, like don't beat yourself up. Like that's just a learning lesson. Like there's so many things to learn, and even no matter how long you've been gardening, there's always going to be like additional things to learn, you know. So but I mostly learned through books and honestly a lot of YouTube, like hours and like so many hours. I remember when I was working at, I used to be an accountant, and so I would turn on YouTube. I would have it minimized. I wasn't watching it or anything, but I would just run the videos kind of like a podcast, which is one of the reasons YouTube is really special to my heart, because I learned so much, and then that's why I want to give back, hence doing the videos and stuff. But I would just run it, and I couldn't pay that much attention to it because I was working, but I would like absorb like, I don't know, 3% of the stuff that was said. And every day I would just do that. I would minimize it, and I put my headphones on, and it would just like osmosis, I guess. And so that's how I learned to garden and farm. Let's see, what's the next question? I already answered, you grow up on a farm? No. How do you fight pests? Ooh, that's a good question. The answer is I just cry. No, I mean, yes and no. But so with pests, it's interesting because I do a lot of work in finding out how everything is like related, and how everything works together. And so my two top pest fighting, well, I guess maybe three pest fighting tools, I guess, if you will. Number one are garter snakes. I don't know, I swear we have like 100 snakes on the property. The garter snakes, for those that don't know, they call them garden snakes, which I usually do too, but people will correct me, so I'm making sure I call them garter snakes. But they eat slugs and caterpillars, and so I'm trying to think what else. I can't think off the top of my head. Aphids, cucumber beetle, like basically everything. And they don't bite, and they're not aggressive. They just hang out, and they always catch me off guard though, because there's like always about at least 4 to 5 in the greenhouse. And so I rely on the snakes. And so I create environments for the snakes so that they could work for me. You know, like I'm in the process of building, it's actually a pizza oven. I'm building a couple of them. One is to actually make pizza. And then the other, it's out of like bricks, and it's low profile. And the other one is for a snake habitat, obviously not to make pizzas, but for basically just putting, and I do have rocks and cardboard boxes in the greenhouse just for the snakes. And they're always in there, and they like to, actually on Instagram, I've been meaning to post a video of, I opened one of the boxes and there's a bunch of snakes in there. But so I rely on the snakes. I also rely on I've got, what are they called? European ground beetle. And they're the large black beetles. In larva stage, they look kind of like a pincher bug, but a really long black one. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but they eat the same thing, slugs, and they're not gonna get your like big banana slugs or whatever. Like you get into like crow or like bird territory with that. But the small like native slugs and aphids and stuff like that. And so for pest control, I really, really rely on nature to help me. It's not foolproof. Like, you know, I do have slug holes in things, you know, and I don't use the Sluggo. I heard there's Sluggo organic. I haven't looked into that. I generally don't like to use things that I couldn't like rub like on my skin or my face, or that's kind of like a rule or whatever. Like, I guess I wouldn't rub stinging nettle on my face, but I could. I guess if I blended it and deactivated the needles, then I could. But I really like to have everything be natural, and also without having like heavy chemicals in the soils. I find that the biological difference, like all of the snakes and the beetles and then the birds, which was gonna be the third thing I say, because I struggle with those they're moss, but they look like butterflies, the white ones that lay the little green caterpillars, and they put holes in everything brassica, like your cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, collard greens, all that stuff. And so I have a lot of those as well. But luckily, you know, with all the trees and stuff, I have a lot of birds, and I actually will watch the birds, and they'll pick out the little caterpillars. And I actually have one bird, and I'm gonna be so sad next year. His name is Charlie. He's a house sparrow, but he might have had a run-in with the cat because he doesn't have any of his tail feathers. And but because he doesn't have any tail feathers, I've been able to identify him from the other birds, and I didn't realize how involved the sparrows are. Like when I go in the morning to feed the ducks, I'll see Charlie is right there. And then when I continue on to go feed, I know this is bad in bird flu era, but, and then when I go to feed the chickens, Charlie will be right there. And when I work out in the garden, I didn't realize, you know, because before I've always known, I've seen a lot of birds, but I don't know, I just thought they were all kind of passing through or moving around. I didn't realize how many like stay. Like now that Charlie is distinct because he doesn't have any tail feathers, I realized that, well, I guess it's technically a she because I did look it up, but she just kind of hangs out with me, you know, and of course she's a wild house sparrow, but so I'm going to work on, and I have seen her with those little green caterpillars in her beak. And of course that makes me so proud because those things wreak havoc on my garden. So as far as how do I control pests, I try and lure the beneficial insects and reptiles, snake, to the garden, and I try and create an environment where everything can live and breed and whatever, you know, that likes to eat the slugs, the caterpillars, the aphids, things like that, cucumber beetle, whatever. So that's that question. Also, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them in and I can add them. I'm just working off of I copied down a list from like other videos and stuff like that of like top questions that I usually get asked so I could do a video about them. But let's see, do your kids work on the farm? No. I would love them to, of course, but they're not obligated. I think it would be different if they grew up on a farm, but they didn't. They were both, well, I think one was a teenager and one was close to being a teenager when we purchased the farm. And so they weren't necessarily like, that wasn't a passion of theirs and it wasn't something that they grew up doing. And if they want to work on the farm, then I want to support that. But I'm not going to make them, and they don't have as much interest in that, which totally bums me out, but they are individuals. And so, you know, if that's not their passion, then that's okay. I have one with a little bit of interest and I really love that. She'll just want to hang out with me and, you know, she'll, you know, help with like digging holes or moving stuff. And so I really treasure that, but I don't make them. So yeah, let's see. Where did you grow up? I grew up actually in California, Southern California, in Riverside County. And I lived there for most of my life, I think mid-20s, mid-20s. I moved up to Washington, and then I moved all around, basically the Lake Washington, kind of down like in like King County area. And then I purchased my first home in Everett, and I was there for a couple years. But I had that farming bug and wanted a garden, and so then I purchased in Stanwood, and now, you know, I'm more rural, and I love I think Stanwood is the best town in the whole entire world, so I'm never leaving now. But yeah, let's see. Does cardboard and compost really work? Yes, it really does. Is it 1000%? No. And is there room for operator error? Yes. And so with my garden, sometimes when I give tours, somebody will say, I notice some areas there's no weeds, and some areas, some of the weeds are starting to come through or whatever. And the answer to that was that I took a shortcut. And I didn't mean to take the shortcut. I didn't want to take the shortcut. But at that time, I didn't have a tractor yet. And so I would rent a tractor, which renting it is really expensive. And you only have like a day or two or something. It's like it was like almost $300 per day. So it was really crazy. So I tried maximize all the amount of time to move all the compost. But I thought I had a lot of cardboard, but I realized that it was really hard to get, because I needed like cardboard to cover like a couple acres, you know. And so I would call local businesses and I would say, do you have a lot of cardboard? They're like, oh, I have so much cardboard. And I'm like, I need like a lot, like an obscene amount. And then I'd show up and it would be like a little bit or whatever. And so I struggled with being able to get enough cardboard to lay the bottom layer of the beds, the no-till beds that I have. I think I hear a lot of them called lasagna gardening. I don't know if I need more layers for that or whatever. And so lasagna gardening or the compost and cardboard, like it works perfect if you can follow the rules. Like I think you're supposed to establish it and let it sit for a little bit and make sure you have all the layers, like specifically the cardboard at the bottom. And but I didn't have the time to let it sit. I needed to go into it right away. And I also didn't have enough cardboard. So in some areas I did put a thick mulch, like, I don't know, 4 to 6 inches just right onto the grass, and had it just, and just kind of hoped. And so it wasn't ideal. And so I do have to go through in some areas and thin out. Like there's just one area that has a lot of grass popping through. But that was also because that I had to rush it because I was growing, too fast. And so it does work. It's an excellent way. I do believe it is the best way. And if you have a smaller area or you have time to let it sit and do its job and make sure you have all the cardboard, it works 100%. If you're kind of pushing the bounds a little bit and making it work, it still works fabulously, but you're gonna need to come back and do a little bit of weeding and stuff like that. And I have like a couple little areas tarped and stuff. But yeah, um, oh, we're down to two more questions. I guess one I've already kind of answered, but it says, "What do you do about slugs?" And so I had answered that with well, kind of about what do I use to control pests. But basically, I rely on nature and the things that like to naturally eat the slugs. And so that would be, and I'm talking about the native slugs. So it's like the little tiny ones that you can like barely see, and like snakes and ground beetles and birds take care of a good percentage of those. Now with the big like banana ones that are like, 6 feet long or whatever, they're massive. Those are duck category. And so I don't run the ducks in the garden during production, because that's discouraged when you're selling food, or illegal, I guess. But if it was my own personal garden, I would. But for selling food, I have to make sure that the poultry is not in the garden. But in the off season, like come fall when everything's done, or through the winter, I'll run my ducks through the garden and they'll clean up any slugs or anything like that. Or just hand picking for the big ones. I'll go through. I actually have a couple like traps, if you will, where it's like pieces of cardboard or turned over 10-20 trays, or like lids for like those big tubs. And then I'll just come and pick it up, and there'll be like 3 or 4 slugs, and I'll scrape them into a thing and feed them to the ducks. So that's kind of how I manage slugs. It's not perfect though. I'm not saying that I don't have like no slug like I don't like that I'm lacking slug problems, because I do have like little holes on things, and the slugs do get to things. It doesn't bother me, and then I just communicate with my customers, and I tell them like, I know, I guess my biggest motto is like your food should be part of the ecosystem, like, or a hybrid of that is that you shouldn't be the only one who will take a bite of your food. And so I know that's like an interesting concept when we're used to like the perfect produce in the stores. But naturally there isn't a way. I guess full netting could work, but that's not feasible, or at least in my process. But usually, you have to put some stuff down, if you know what I mean, to get that perfect produce. So my stuff always have teeny tiny little holes, or little slight imperfections. But that's because it's not toxic to insects. So that's good, I guess. Last question, and again, if you have any, go ahead and drop them down below. I'll see them, or I'll end the meeting after this. But what the last question is, that I actually get this often more earlier in the year, have you tried winter gardening? And I haven't. It's on my list of things to research. I like have a list that I like finally sit down and look at like each fall, and it's kind of on my list. I'm not sure that I would try it because this year I'll be doing for my first year growing year round in the greenhouse, and so that'll kind of take like all of my experimental time or whatnot. But I from what I know of winter sowing, it's an excellent concept. I do, it's, I think, and I could be wrong, but from what I understand of it, it's where you put the seeds in the ground or in like a jug, and where it's out in the elements, like you're not giving special heat treatment or special light treatment. And then you rely on the seed's natural ability to know when is the right time for them to emerge. And then so they do that. Like, but you put them out like earlier than you would. Hi, Janet. And and so I think the concept is really cool. I'm not sure how it would work on scale, and like I'd have to research a little bit more because that's all that I understand of it. But at like first blush, I think it's a really interesting concept, but I don't know if I'll implement it this year or not, or give it a try. I might, because there seems to be a lot of interest. But so yeah, so that's all the questions. I hope that you have enjoyed them, and thank you, of course, for watching always. If you have any other questions, you can add them down below, and I'll put them into future videos. I've kind of fallen into a habit of doing lives on Mondays, and it's kind of fun to just, like connect with you guys after the weekend is always just a big, like heavy weekend for me. It started because I was always having like health problems over the weekend and then would do a live on Monday. And so now I think it's going to stick. But anyways, thank you for hanging out with me. For those of you that have been here the whole time, and for those just tuning in, I'm sorry I missed you almost. But thank you for watching, and have a great day and happy gardening, and talk to you later. Bye.